and I feel really privileged to be able to host these Grand Round events. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm currently in Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country, and as always, I'd just like to acknowledge that we really need to learn from our First Nations colleagues who've stewarded this land so successfully for millennia. Many lessons to be learnt. Obviously, I'd like to acknowledge any First Nations people on this call and any elders, past, present or emerging. Now, we normally record these meetings. I hope that's okay with everyone. We will post them on our website for anyone who wants to watch them or pass them on to their colleagues. I encourage you to do so. Emails will be sent around after this meeting from time to time. I encourage you to join the email list. I think the volume for this kind of conversation needs to be really loud and really shared, so please join if you wish to receive updates about this, and please pass on to your colleagues. I would like to thank our two speakers today, who I'll introduce shortly, but Eugenie, I'm going to just put the slide up for the event, which I might get you to introduce if you don't mind.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Michael. So yes, I'm Eugenie Kayak, and on the 2nd of October, we've got a collaborative symposium happening with the University of Melbourne, Monash University and Alfred Health. Nick Watts is going to be present as the keynote speaker. It's a little bit, it's foggy on mine. And we'll have also a really great lineup of other speakers, including several hospital CEOs, Madeline Scallon, who's the director of the national unit. We've got Climate Health Victoria coming, and also some at a more practical level. So we're going at the higher level and more practical level, some clinicians and nurse representatives. So the QR code is there, and there we go. Registrations have opened, and it is a hybrid event, except we are encouraging people to come face-to-face. It'll be at the University of Melbourne. Thanks.
Thanks, Eugenie, and apologies. I'm not sure why it's gone fuzzy or why it's even just changed slides by itself, but it has. Is it still fuzzy?
No, that's good now. And you could probably Google it. I haven't actually tried to Google it, but the registration page is there. So, yeah.
So I'll just leave it there for a second if anyone's taking a photo of that QR code. So we'll move on to the speakers. So we've got two fantastic speakers to hear from today, whom I'll introduce shortly. We will stop in between speakers for those that are interested in asking questions. And as always, we'll monitor the chat on Teams if anyone wants to ask a question that way. Now, our first speaker is Siska. Siska Hesker is the Manager of Climate Change and Program Delivery, Climate Health Victoria. Siska is an environmental engineer with over 20 years of experience working on sustainability issues. She has experience working in both the private and public sector and has worked within a range of industries, including transport, energy, water, and government to deliver sustainability projects. Siska's breadth of experience covers many facets of sustainability and environmental management, including decarbonisation and climate adaptation, waste management, pollution prevention, and water efficiency. Siska's been working with the Department of Health since mid-2023 and was heavily involved in the creation of the Climate Health Victoria unit and now leads the program delivery team. Siska prides herself on her ability to deliver practical projects with tangible outcomes, and today will talk to us about 100% renewable energy in the Victorian health system. Thank you very much, Siska.
Thanks, Michael. I'll just get my slides up. Okay, can I just get a thumbs up that might be working? Great. All right, thanks very much for having me here today. As Michael said, I've been in the health sector for now about 2 years, and I think one of the things that has struck me most is how engaged the workforce is on these issues. That's not only really inspiring, but it's also a very strong enabling factor to help us make sure that we can keep doing the work we're doing. So events like this are really important. I am calling in from the Department of Health's head office in Naarm, so on Wurundjeri land also today. So I'm going to talk about 100% renewable, but we'll start just in case anybody's unfamiliar with Climate Health Victoria, just a very quick overview. So we were established last year as a unit within the Department of Health to drive climate action across the health portfolio. And that includes both adaptation and mitigation. So adaptation, improving the resilience that the health system has towards climate change, but also mitigation, cutting down our greenhouse gas emissions to reduce how much we're contributing to the climate change as well. We do work on broader sustainability issues like waste and those things as well, but we do try to take a climate lens to those issues. We work closely with a number of key partners, so the Victorian Health Building Authority from an infrastructure perspective, Safer Care Victoria, for example, from a clinical care perspective as well. But getting on to 100% renewable energy and why we're talking about it today. So Victoria has benefited since 2017 from really strong and world-leading legislation on climate. So the Climate Action Act, as it's called now, was introduced back then in 2017, and it covers both adaptation and mitigation. And importantly, from a mitigation perspective, it includes a requirement for the Victorian government to prepare 5-yearly emission reduction pledges for a number of key sectors. And the key sector that's, of course, relevant to health is the whole of Victorian government sector. So the first of these pledges was released in 2021. That's what you can see in the middle of the screen there, and it runs through until 2025, till now. And a key commitment within that was by 2025, Victorian government operations would be powered by 100% renewable energy. This is one of the factors that led to the creation or recreation of the State Electricity Commission, the SEC, who is now retailing 100% renewables to Victorian government operations, including hospitals. For those of you that are a bit curious about what else is in that whole of Victorian Government Emissions Pledge, you can look it up. It's publicly available, but it does include things like the introduction of 400 zero-emission vehicles as part of the government fleet by 2023. All new public buses purchased from 2025 will also be zero-emission vehicles. It included commitments to improving energy efficiency in government buildings through the ongoing implementation of the Greener Government Buildings Program, for example. And it committed to a 42% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the water sector, which is the government's largest source of emissions. So where's that got us to? So as of 1st of July, all sites that consume over 40 megawatt hours and were either on the Health Share Victoria or the state purchasing contracts began receiving 100% renewable electricity. Maybe if you're around, if you can mute yourselves, that'd be great. To put that in sort of context, so 40 megawatt hours is about the size of 4 to 5 typical households. So our expectation is that this commitment will meet sort of around 95% of the health sector's electricity needs. Accounting for all those large sites are very much the dominant users of electricity. A number of small sites won't be covered by this commitment, but we're expecting them to be about less than 5% of that total electricity there. I do notice that there are a couple of exceptions to this. So there are a few hospitals that weren't on the HSV or SPC contracts. Albury Hospital is in New South Wales, so can't legally be supplied by the SEC. So there's a few little intricacies like that we're still working through with DECA and HSV as well. But where's this all coming from? So going back out to the big picture. So that Climate Action Act, which I referred to before, sets a range of targets relevant to this. And what you can see on the screen here is the targets that exist around renewable energy and related targets there. So what it shows is that currently 40%, aiming for a 40% contribution of renewable electricity to Victoria's power supplies in 2025, increasing up to 100% by 2045. So as time moves on, the direct purchase of renewable energy is going to become less and less important because essentially everybody's going to be getting it. But right now we're at that 40% mark as a state, but as government, we're leading the way now with the purchase of 100% renewables. So in addition to these sort of policy directions, the Victorian government also directly invested in renewables in Victoria through a number of reverse auctions done through the Victorian Renewable Energy Target. So through that, they directly invested in 11 renewable projects throughout the state, solar, wind and battery projects.
And it's the energy from these projects which are being matched to Victorian government electricity use now. So a bit of might be a little bit obvious, but we're not plugged in directly to those wind farms or solar power plants there. We are still being supplied from the grid, but it is an accounting process. So renewable locations that are generating renewable power get what's called large-scale generation certificates under a Commonwealth scheme for every bit of electricity they produce, and those certificates are being accounted for against Victorian government usage now. Going into this a little bit more, just to show you where we are at in terms of these targets. So this slide here shows what Victoria's electricity mix over the last 12 months, and it aligns pretty closely with the target which you saw before. So currently about 60% of electricity came from brown coal in the last 12 months, 2% from gas, and then the remainder largely come from these renewables here. So 25% from wind, 4% from solar, and 5% from hydro. For anybody who's really interested in this sort of thing, this information is all publicly available, and you can see it live at any point in time to see how this mix changes throughout the day and across seasons, for example. Oh, sorry, this is a bit pixelated on mine. Hopefully it's not on yours, but we'll see how we go. So this is the current greenhouse gas emissions from the Victorian Health Services, so Scope 1 and 2. So what that means, it's emissions associated with electricity purchase, which is Scope 2 emissions, as well as emissions from any assets or facilities that are operated. So the burning of natural gas, the release of medical gases, that kind of thing. It doesn't include our supply chain emissions. And what it shows here is that about nearly 70% of the health services greenhouse gas emissions come from electricity, 25% from gas, and the remainder from transport, medical and other medical gases and other sources there. So that's what it was in 23-24. And this is what we're expecting it to look something like at the end of this financial year. So the big change there is natural gas becomes that essentially that 70% of usage. Transport, medical gases and others all account for a significantly high proportion as well. And then we still have this 9% of electricity here, which we expect from those smaller sites which aren't being covered by this commitment. So what this does, I think firstly to point out, just because sites are being powered by 100% renewable doesn't mean that doesn't mean that we should stop trying to save electricity. Obviously, the renewable electricity that isn't consumed at our hospitals will be available to offset coal use elsewhere. So that's one important factor. And of course, there's a really significant cost associated with electricity use. So it's still really good practice to try and be energy efficient with electricity still. But from a Department of Health perspective, it means our focus is switching to gas and how we can reduce gas use as part of what we do. So looking at that, we are looking to shut down some cogeneration units. So for those of you who are unaware, a number of hospitals throughout the state have had cogeneration units, which are essentially kind of like big turbines that burn gas to produce both electricity and heat. They've had them on site to essentially support grid inefficiencies or inability of the grid to meet electricity demand. That's been addressed, and now these cogeneration units are all being decommissioned. So a couple already have. We're expecting another 2 units to be decommissioned by end of September, and the final one later in the year. So that will reduce gas use to an extent. And then we're also building new facilities as having no new gas connections. So New Melton Health Hospital has been well touted as being Victoria's first all-electric hospital, but other capital developments that are going on throughout the state currently are also being built as all-electric, as you can see there. And then finally, Department of Health working with Viva is about to start electrification assessments of a number of hospitals as well, to see how we can work to progressively start electrifying existing sites as well. This is really complex, and it's if we were to implement these initiatives, it's not cheap. So there's a lot of work to be done to figuring out resourcing and the best approach to do this. But it is something that we are working on, and certainly acknowledge that there are a number of health services who are doing this kind of work off their own bat as well. That's essentially it from me, and I was going to leave it there with any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see you all.
Well, thank you very much, Siska, for that presentation. It was very clear, and thank you for simplifying it for us health workers where some of this language gets a little bit convoluted. And it's really exciting and inspirational that this kind of leadership is coming from our state government. So we will call for questions. But Siska?
Andrew. You're on mute, Andrew, sorry.
I should know after 5 years of Teams, shouldn't I? But anyway. Start again. Thanks, Siska, for the presentation. It was fantastic. It's always great to hear the positive work that's going on in this space. An area that's sort of close to my heart, but at the same time, from an environmental perspective, I have some concerns and reservations as to where all of this is going, and that is, as healthcare services increasingly become digitized, we and you know, we're migrating to things like Office 365 and so-called cloud. And cloud sounds nice because it sounds like it's nice and green and it's up in the sky, and there's you envisage clouds and blue sky and all the rest of it. But the reality is it couldn't be further than the truth. They're massive data centers that require massive amounts of power. And the building that's going on globally at the moment to build these data centers, and particularly with artificial intelligence, AI, which again, the world, including healthcare, is moving toward. We're seeing a massive energy demand requirement. Now, not all of that, of course, is going to be driven by healthcare, but healthcare is going to be and currently is a big user of cloud computing and AI computing in the not too distant future. So at the moment, a lot of the traditional on-prem servers would be considered Scope 2 emissions, I would think. Moving to cloud computers, that probably makes our Scope 2 look better because we'd be getting rid of local servers. But that would essentially be increasing Scope 3 emissions, which is third-party providers. And I think the estimate sort of in the next decade, we'd just in healthcare alone, we'll be probably, we'll be probably using something like somewhere between 70 to 250 megawatts of power just to be running data centers for healthcare, which equates to somewhere about 0.6 to 2.6 terawatt hours per year, which is a massive amount of power. So, I mean, I don't want to pour cold water on the great work that's being done, and it's fantastic that we are doing it. But I just wonder when we consider about, hospitals getting to zero, and that's the hospital physical sites getting to zero emissions. I also wonder whether we've got a blind spot, which is the use of our insatiable use of data centers, which are hidden from us. They're offsite, you don't see them. And as I said, AI is coming along, which is a massive user of power as well. So cooling these data centers is becoming a big problem, and we're seeing that problem in the US, and it's going to be hitting our shores shortly. So anyway, that was a long question, maybe a statement as well, but what's your thoughts in that space?
Sure, absolutely. You bang on with it being an issue, and I think there's a few different elements to it. So one, in terms of capturing what we call our Scope 3 emissions, so emissions associated with our supply chain, that is a piece of work that we're currently doing through a sister team of mine that Anuja's looking after. So that's something that we're looking to capture, and that will be made, we're essentially integrating that into existing environmental data systems that we have, so that we can start recording health service Scope 3 emissions and start accounting for those. So definitely hoping to make that more transparent moving forward, I think, is a key part of that. And then, of course, in terms of how we address those sorts of issues, it's a big one. And, hopefully as technology develops, that those AI centres will become more efficient, but it is something that we need to be really mindful of. We actually had an article in our latest newsletter about the energy usage associated with AI, and it's something that, I think we all need to be cognizant of as well. Yeah.
Thanks.
Eugenie.
Yeah, thanks. I'll ask a question. Thank you, Siska. That was great, and it's so inspiring to see what Victoria Government is leading in this area when it comes to transitioning to renewable energy in a state that was so heavily reliant on brown coal. 65% renewable energy by 2030. I think that's a great target. And I just wondered if you had any reflections on some of the potentially anticipated barriers in getting to that high renewable energy target, or whether you feel that might be relatively smooth, a smooth transition. Just some reflections there.
Yeah, I think at a state level, those targets remain ambitious. I think they're achievable, but ambitious. So things like the Snowy Hydro 2.0 will contribute into that, as well as a range of other developments that are happening. It is an area that is fraught with complexity, though. So, you look at the media and there are concerns about transmission lines and that kind of stuff that has to be put in place to support renewable projects. So, there's a lot happening there. If we look within our own remit, within the health sector, we only have so much roof space. We only have so much car park space where things like solar can go. I am personally quite a big believer in looking at the other side of it, which is demand. We still have to reduce our electricity use. Electricity that we don't use, our wind farms and solar power plants that don't have to be built. So really focusing on driving down our electricity use is the other part of that as well. So I think it's really important that we maintain that, and we're certainly looking to do that through our work with Viva and others.
Okay, thanks. I did have a second question, which you basically just hinted on, and that was about energy efficiency, actually, and how vital that still is, which is what you said. Would you like to just comment then more specifically on what work you're doing about energy efficiency when it comes to healthcare in Victoria?
Yeah, absolutely. So things like the Greener Government Buildings program have been around for a long time now, and hospitals are continuing to take that up. If you look at the program, which is available to all government buildings, the health sector is definitely taking the majority of the funding that's available there, which is good for us. Don't know what the others are doing, but good for us. So there's some exciting stuff in the pipeline happening there with a few health services over the next little while. And then gas is obviously the big part of that as well. But something that I think is often, I suppose, overlooked when we get into these sustainability focused topics is the role of keeping people healthy and out of care. Things like home-based care, care close to home, virtual care, acknowledging Andrew's point around AI and clouds and that kind of stuff. And that's got a really important role to play as well, particularly combined with things like an ageing population and that kind of stuff. We've got to be smart and innovative about how we're delivering care in the future as well.
All right, well, thank you very much, Siska. It was a great explanation and presentation, and I must say, in these sessions we have, and when people talk about the local government targets, a common question is how actually are we going to achieve that? So it's great to have that clarified. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Michael.
Now, our next speaker is Urvi Thaneka. Urvi is a PhD candidate within the Institute of Health and Transformation at Deakin University, partnering with Barwon Health, focusing on reducing their Scope 3 emissions using systems, dynamics and economic analysis. Urvi also works with the Climate Catch Lab at the University of Melbourne on projects that intersect climate change, healthcare systems and systems transformation. Urvi is a clinically trained dentist with a Masters in Health and Human Services Management and has been a part of the Victorian COVID-19 clinical surge workforce. Urvi has clinical and research experience in the field of health promotion and health literacy in the Indo-Pacific region. And today he's going to talk about exploring opportunities to reduce Scope 3 emissions in renewably powered health services. Thank you so much, Urvi.
Thanks, Michael. I'm just going to start sharing my slides. Yep, I think is that okay?
Yeah, we can see it. Looks good.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. My name is Urvi. I am a PhD candidate about to finish in a week, so best of luck to me. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm presenting today. I'm based at Hawthorne, and today I'll be talking about a snippet from my PhD research and the broader project actually, which looked at the perceptions of healthcare stakeholders to leverage opportunities in renewably powered health services to reduce scope 3 emissions. So some of it we touched on, Siska touched on earlier as well. Much of it is building from the presentation earlier. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge my supervisors and my project team. Associate Professor Rebecca Patrick, Dr. Mike Forrester, Professor Martin Henschner, Dr. Jayatri and Dr. George Keel. They've been an immense part of my journey, and I'm quite thankful for their support and mentorship up till now. So we know that a bit of background, we know that a lot of that health systems contribute to climate change through greenhouse gas emissions, and scopes help us in categorizing the emissions on basis of their source. So scope 1 is everything we burn on site. So this includes the fossil fuels, which are burnt on site, the gas of the company cars, the fuel which is used to power the equipment. Scope 2 is everything that we buy. So this is associated with purchased electricity, steam for heating and cooling purposes, and it is indirect because the energy is generated off-site. Now, scope 1 and 2 are relatively easier to control by transitioning to renewable energy, much of which the work has already been started now and is in good progress. The real challenge is scope 3, which is everything that is beyond scope 1 and 2. So these are the emissions in the companies or the organization's supply chain. There are about 15 categories of emissions. They're difficult to measure, and more than 70% of healthcare's share of emissions comes from scope 3 categories. So the categorization of emissions here is from the National Health and Climate Strategy, the Australian Department of Health, Disability and Aging, and they actually categorize the different sources of emissions according to the scope. So we can see scope 1, 2, and the range of different categories and scope 3 emissions. And the Australian health sector produces approximately 5 from the recent estimates, as well as or the past estimates at 7, about 5 to 7% of the national carbon emissions. The focus, healthcare actually can reduce its carbon footprint by reducing carbon dioxide and the eventual process and eventually eliminating them. And the process is known as decarbonization. At present, as we have seen from a shared understanding that in Australia and specifically Victoria, there's an increased focus on transitioning to renewable energy, energy reduction, energy efficiency initiatives. And this is very important, and it addresses about 30% of the healthcare's footprint, considering scope 3 as well. But the thing that is a challenge now is understanding scope 3 emissions, because a health system can be powered by renewable energy, but can still produce emissions from scope 3 categories if they are not addressed. And it's true vice versa as well. So for example, from instruments, if we transition from single-use to reusable surgical instruments, we can reduce scope 3 emissions from the supply chain, but increase scope 1 emissions if the sterilization still relies on fossil fuel energy. So the scopes are actually interdependent, and there's an increasing recognition in literature of the interdependency between scope 1, 2, and 3. Today, what I'll be talking about is a part of a larger PhD project where we actually used systems modeling and economic analysis to understand that while we are on this systemic transformation to reduce, to have renewably powered health services in Victoria, can this transformation be leveraged to reduce scope 3 emission categories as well? And if so, what are those leverage points that we can incorporate in a health services planning, especially for the newer hospital builds that are in progress or underway in the next few years in Victoria? So the first phase was we did interviews, and since it was an exploratory study, we wanted to understand the perspectives of healthcare stakeholders and map a concrete set of approaches to reduce scope 3 emissions. It was an ideal starting point because in Victoria, we need evidence on what we already know and from the people involved in the system who will be affected most by these changes and moving ahead from those changes. What I'll be talking majorly in today's presentation is the phase 2, in which we did a pilot economic analysis in the health service case study in Bhavin Health. And we actually tried to understand that if we make a transition from single-use to reusable instruments, what are the financial costs, what are the economic costs, and how can these results be impacted by the source of energy use in the hospital? So can coal power energy or renewable power energy actually make difference to this transition, and how much of that difference can it make? And the last phase was then we wanted to move into the implementation space. So we had the evidence of costs, emissions, and then we went back to the stakeholders and tried to map the barriers and enablers to the system. And I would like to acknowledge that some of the very generous people in this room have been participants in my research as well, and I'm quite grateful to them for their time. So focusing on, so this was the Scope 3 co-benefits scoping review that was published in the Medical Journal of Australia. So this was our study in which we looked at different range of opportunities to reduce Scope 3 emissions as co-benefits of renewable energy. So one of them that we already talked about was how if we transition from single-use to reusable instruments in renewably powered health services by infrastructural changes such as large washers for sterilization purposes, it could have multiple benefits in costs and environmental outcomes. It could also have flow-on advantages for waste reduction. Then we looked at other factors such as, then we had inputs from stakeholders as well as literature on other factors such as if we have renewably powered health services, investment in on-site chargers and secure parking facilities could incentivize staff to uptake more electric vehicles. And in Greater Manchester, they have done this where they have electric vehicle chargers and it gives electricity back to the grid while charging as well. So this helped them to reduce a lot of emissions from their staff and patient travel. And also, there's a lot of emerging research coming from renewably powered medical gas supply chains. So as we know that medical gases, oxygen and nitrogen are heavily in demand, and there has been companies in the Europe who have produced these gases using 100% renewable energy. The company is Air Liquidite, and they are working to actually produce these gases on site in hospitals now. So even to reduce emissions from transportation of these gases. So there's work going on underway, and they're able to get substantial reductions from these emissions. So these are just potential opportunities as Victorian Health Services are moving to being renewably powered. What are the future opportunities we can work on to even reduce the existing Scope 3 emissions? The economic analysis, we looked at the economic and environmental costs of reducing Scope 3 related emissions related to instruments within a planned cesarean. And we looked at cesareans because we wanted to focus on a high frequency surgical procedure. And we did a health economic analysis. We did cost minimization. So essentially we compared costs between the current practice and if we were to make a change with reusable instruments. We did the study at a regional health service and it conducted about 730 planned cesareans annually. We did a literature review to understand what are the different cost categories that should be included. It was, for example, clinical and staff activity data, equipment usage. We looked at the hospital records. We consulted the obstetricians, clinicians, all the wonderful sterilization, waste management coordinators within the hospital who helped us with their data. And we built a model in Excel, and we had the time frame of analysis, which was 5 years. We used existing data from life cycle analysis, and we also calculated some of the data for the sterilization and end of life using the national greenhouse gas accounting factors. We included the different types of single-use and reusable equipment and materials in cesarean pre-packs, which are used. We excluded the other consumables outside the pre-packs for the sake of analysis, and we discounted the costs as well. One of the things that we actually did in this analysis was we converted the environmental emissions into a dollar value using a parameter called as the social cost of carbon. So the social cost of carbon is essentially a dollar value given to every ton of carbon dioxide emitted in the atmosphere. Now, this is a widely recognized tool for converting emissions into dollar values, and it's used by a lot of climate policymakers around the world. So what it does is essentially, rather than reporting emissions as saying this much tons of carbon dioxide and these are the financial costs, it actually aggregates the two metrics together to show the total cost reduction. So there are obviously limitations because it depends on, everyone has different values for social cost of carbon. So the dollar value for every ton is given differently around the world. We tried to use the World Bank's shadow price for carbon. And we looked at the cesarean pre-pack, which had the disposable items such as gowns, drapes, plastic bowls, kidney dishes, and they also had reusable surgical stainless steel instruments like the forceps, needles, retractors. And what we did was we tried to make changes on two different levels. So the first change was we changed the plastic bowls and kidney dishes to steel bowls and kidney dishes. And we purposefully focused on a non-critical item substitution to actually see if the changes that can be made in the pack are within the control of clinicians or can be made without a significant procedural overhaul at the hospital. And the second change that we tried to do was changes in the health services power supply. And this scenario, actually, when I started this research back in 2022, was knowing the fact that, okay, in 2025, we'll have renewable energy. And I'm quite optimistic and feeling happy now that now we are going to be powered by renewable energy. So this was to understand that changes can be made at two levels. One is at the level of clinical operational level, that is changes in the pre-packs, changes in the instrument packs. And the second changes at an institutional level, which is changes in the health services power supply. What we wanted to understand is, can changes be made at two levels and what impact would it have on the results? So when we look at the results, we realize that if you just look at the results on the left-hand side, which is the brown primary analysis powered by coal energy, which is the current scenario, if we change from the current pack to the revised pack, there's actually an increase in the emissions. So if you incorporate reusable instruments currently with coal power, the emissions actually increase. And the reason for this was because of the energy intensive sterilization process, which is dominated by coal power. But contrast, if you go to renewable energy, the emissions from sterilization is reduced drastically. And we have a 25% reduction if we change from the current pack to the revised pack. But one of the most important things to see here is the impact of the combined intervention, which is if we transition from the current pack in coal power, which is our business as usual or the situation we are in now currently, versus renewables with reusables with renewable power, we can have the largest environmental gains, which is about 68% reduction of emissions. It also is consistent with the ongoing calls in literature from various Australia as well as international experts, which say that renewables make reusables better. So essentially transitioning in the pack as well as renewable energy is when we can have maximum gains. When we looked at the costs, so the numbers in the blue are just the financial or the economic cost. So this is not including the emissions. So when we looked at the cost, changing from current pack to revised pack to include more reusable instruments can actually help reduce 4% of the costs over 5-year duration. But the numbers in orange actually don't look too good. The numbers in orange are the monetized environmental cost. So the emissions when monetized into costs, they actually increase. And this is because under coal power, if the emissions increase, the environmental costs also increase. But the same situation, if we flip it and make it to renewable energy, then there's actually a reduction in environmental costs because the emissions also decrease. If we look at the combined results, if we look at the financial cost, waste produced, carbon emissions, environmental cost, subsequent total cost, with renewable energy, we have about 25% reduction across all the categories. And there's a very minor impact on the total costs. And I'll come back to it later. But if we were to transition, and the same thing on the left-hand side, but if we were to make these transitions under coal power, we'll actually have increase in the emissions and slight decrease in the total financial costs. The reason why the environmental costs have a very small impact on the total cost. The reason for that is because what I mentioned earlier regarding the value for social cost of carbon. So for example, the World Bank gives the value for social cost of carbon only $63 per ton, which is quite less compared to all the other financial costs in the hospital. And there's a lot of research been saying that the social cost of carbon value should increase to accurately reflect the environmental damages. So that's a lot of debate ongoing in literature. But I think the larger debate here is we're talking about it from a health service point of view. Currently, in hospital level procurement, if we were to decide, okay, should a single-use or usable instrument be procured, we do not have the mechanisms to incorporate environmental costs in decision making at a hospital level today. So there is research ongoing and there's work ongoing on how we can incorporate the environmental cost at hospital level decision making. Or do we need like integrated decision-making frameworks to incorporate environmental emissions alongside costs in procurement? So that's the broader discussion about value-based procurement, which is for some time other. And just summarizing my results, I think if we were to make the changes from current to revised pact, we would actually end up increasing in emissions. We can achieve a reduction in economic costs if we were to make the change. The combined intervention, if you were to change the instruments as well as have renewable energy for sterilization, we can achieve maximum reduction. So that just goes to show the power of strategic changes, which can be done both at the health service and operational level, as well as at the institutional level. And I think because we talked so much about cesareans, I think I would like to end with this quote from Dr. Christine Banden, who is the chair for the Environmental Sustainability Group at the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, who says that the choices we make today will lock in the health outcomes for generations to come, and children have the right to be born in a safe environment with a stable climate. So with that, these are my references, and if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Evie. Lovely presentation, and one week to go. That's very exciting.
Thanks, Michael.
I'm an upper GI surgeon, and I certainly must say that from a surgical perspective, those Scope 3 emissions are the real bugbear. They sort of seem infinite. They also seem incredibly difficult to tackle. So in the current context of our health system becoming sourced from renewable energies and with the projected targets, is now the time, should I be trying to replace all my single-use equipment with reusables now, or should I wait? What would be the right course of action now?
Very good question, Michael. So this part of the research just goes to show that on paper it makes sense, but as we all know, that there are a lot of things which happen in implementation outside just numbers. So actually, I didn't bring this up, but I think I can probably. The next phase of the research actually looked at what are the barriers and enablers to actually getting reusables in practice, because we looked at obstetrics and gynecology, but almost surgeons in all the fields. So there are different level of context specific barriers as well at the level of the specialty as well as the level of the hospital. So there were a range of different factors that we came across. And if you could just allow me, I can just quickly just share my screen for like a minute to show you that this was the systems modeling we did to actually understand that, okay, it makes sense on paper, but now what needs to be actually done at the hospital to make this actually useful in practice. So for example, we realized that there are different, I can just zoom in if you want. So we realized that there are different levels of barriers, such as staff perception and training, instrument usage and preferences, operational and resource efficiency. So that is regarding the sterilization units. Do they have capacity and funding to be able to incorporate those reusable instruments in their current workflows? Regulatory and compliance requirements. What instruments could actually be reusable? Are they safe to use? Are they in practice? Do we have a national accredited list of single-use and reusable equivalents confirming their clinical efficacy and infection control protocols currently? There's also debate regarding some instruments which are classified as semi-critical, some are critical, and there's some discrepancy in that, as well as the other financial, operational, and environmental considerations. So this was the result of the systems modeling. And we then came up with the implementation plan, recommendations, what should be the next steps for Australia, specifically Victoria. And yeah, so probably for the next grant round, I can present the findings from that.
So what do I do, Urvi?
I think one of the main things you can do is have environmental working group first in the hospital and build a business case regarding low risk items and have a small use case regarding the cost and carbon emission savings. If you're able to present that to the hospital leadership team, you can try and get more funding for increasing the capacity for sterilization, because sterilization hubs are one of the most important bottlenecks to amp up reusable use. I had a lot of sterilization managers in my study who said that we want reusables. I just don't have the funding to have more staff, more space to do that. So I think advocating for funding large quantity of washers, sophisticated sterilization technologies is like the one first step to amp that up.
Great answer. Michael Loftus, great to have you with us, Mike. You got a question?
Yeah, thank you. Great talk. Sorry if I missed this. I was driving at the time. In terms of your economic analysis, did that include an assessment of staffing that might be required? I appreciate that wouldn't be exclusively for those instruments, but there are funding costs associated with capital and labour moving towards reusable.
Yes, Michael, thanks for your question. Yes, that was a consideration in the economic analysis, but because we looked at only the bowls and kidney dishes, which was not significantly that big a change in reusable equipment in the cesarean pre-packs, we did incorporate for changes in staffing and hence the labor costs in the economic analysis. But if we were to make these changes at a larger institutional level for items such as gowns or other high impact items, the impact of staffing would play a major role. But currently, the cost that we incorporated for increased labor didn't make a big difference to the economic analysis. But yes, we did include that. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Urvi? Otherwise, I'll thank Siska for presenting on the roadmap to 100% renewable energy in the Victorian health system, and thank you again, Urvi, for showing us the pathway to start reducing that ginormous hidden Pandora's box of Scope 3 emissions.
And if I would just like to acknowledge that Mike Forrester, my supervisor, is also attending today, so he's happy to answer any questions if anyone has for him as well.
The final call for questions, anyone? Otherwise, our next Melbourne University Grand Rounds will be on the 12th of November, and some comms will come out well before that time. Our next St Vincent's Hospital Grand Rounds is on the 17th of September, and you're certainly all more than welcome to attend that if that's of any interest. Again, some comms will come out. I don't think there's any other questions, Urvi, so I'll thank everyone for coming along today. Please don't hesitate to contact myself or Eugenie Kayak, the Enterprise Professor of Sustainability, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions or recommendations. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you guys in a few months. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Urvi.
Thank you,
Thanks, Siska.
Michael and Urvi and Siska. Bye.
Thank you.